Okay, so this might be the last video for this. Yay! Finally got done. Be able to move on to other things. And forgive me if I go astray because I did not sleep last night. I watched episodes of Bones, reruns of Bones. Shouldn't have done that. Got too many things to do today. But, oh well, life goes on. Got my coffee. I'm gonna hang in there. Not looking forward to it. I gotta call the FBI today. I'm not excited about that phone call, but hey, for now we're gonna have fun and just finish the story. Isn't that exciting? Okay, so as always, some things are just not completely complete. There's a reason for this one not being complete, even though I got permission from the person it involves. There's still kind of a brain block. Not really sure why at the moment. Haven't really given it a whole lot of thought. I'll figure it out later, if need be. But after that, that'll be it. Yay. Okay, ready? Yeah. Tonight, the night would be her enemy. This was one battle that she'd been preparing a long time for. Actually, it was more like a quest inside of a quest. Kind of, inside of another quest. And, she tells the commentary in her head, which was a side effect from being isolated for so long. Again, forgive me, some of the wording is a little repetitious, but go with it. It's just how the dream happened. She needed some of the strongest, most universal material known to all the worlds, spider silk. In particular, Kevlar spider silk. It was not only the strongest, but because of its magical properties, it had elastic stretching abilities and could combine strength and material, no matter how weak. You could find it in only one place, in a cave in the Ynir mountain. The biggest difficulty, or Ynir, I'm not sure how they pronounce it. The biggest difficulty wasn't the mountain climbing or the treacherous pass or the troll under the bridge or even the riddle maker. It was, of course, the spiders. They were gigantic, and the worst part, if they caught you, you did not die slowly. They were pretty much the same as most spiders, roll you up as their victim in a sticky web, the web which could also be used as a napkin while they ate, and then later, when they were done with you, the web also became a convenient coffin. The difference between these spiders and normal spiders was time, because it took twice as long, if not longer, for them to finish you off. Why, you ask? Oh, because they eat you twice. Or sometimes 3 times. So whereas most evil, bad creatures only suck the lives out of the children of Salem once, these guys get to go back for seconds and thirds. All because of the eek venom. No, not eek, like ah, but eek. Although that other spelling could apply here as well. The eek venom gives the spiders the ability to treat their victim like a poor mother's soup. As they drain some of the victim, they add their venom, replacing what they took. Then they let it marinate for a while, before enjoying it some more. The result? It's just like adding extra water to the soup to make it go further. They repeat this process until all that is left is brain, heart, and lungs. Oh, and the mushy venom mixture. It's like a dessert, and they save the best for last. Also, not consuming those items keeps you, the victim, alive, so you can enjoy your own torture. It's a little painful, but the most worrisome part is you actually get to watch yourself disappear little by little. Ah, Houdini, Copperfield, eat your heart out. No, wait, the spiders will do it for you. Oh, you dread Pirate Robinson, you thought the pain was bad. The other reason it's called eek, actually the real reason, the venom mixes with the webbing department inside the spider, creating not only the strongest but also the stretchiest spider silk in Kevlar County and everywhere else. Of course, this is all according to a book, so who knows if it's actually true, but shall find out, and after I pick up one little item. So Princess Nabs was the only creature that had ever spent time with the spiders and lived through it. She would be my first stop. On my way to see her, I took a break on a deserted hill with nothing but a bunch of great big rocks around. While there, I stopped for a drink at a well. And, well, I fell in. It was lucky for me because what I found at the bottom, truth be told, really saved my life later on. Also lucky for me was the ladder I had grabbed a hold of on my way down. It was partially fused to the wall and it spanned all the way down, but not all the way up. When I climbed back up, I eyed the distance to the other side, where some footholds were, and then the distance to the top. It didn't look so far. So I jumped over to the side, and ended up, spread, crisscross, toward the top of the well. I'm sure I made a beautiful X, marks the spot, with my keister in the air, a lovely target for the carrion birds flying overhead. Occasionally they would dip low to check my status, seeing if it was supper time yet. According to my book, they only like to sniff out and chew on the dead, rotting, smelly things, so I just had to remind myself not to be gassy and to continue making noises such as talking, so that they would know I was still alive. Yes, I talked to the birds. In fact, I told them my life story, because that is how long I was hanging over the well. Leave it to me to pick a deserted well to get a drink of water out of. Well, at least I had the birds for companionship, and they had me, like a picture they could stare at on a menu. Excuse me, waiter, but I'll have the rump roast with a side of ham and some baby back ribs. Oh, I wish I had my cloak on for cover, because I was feeling a little chilly. At that point, I started singing to the birds, but they squawked at me. I guess they didn't like my singing. So I went back to my story. So you know what I did, birds? I said as I looked up at them. I couldn't find them anywhere. Unbelievable. I read like the only way to make mother was to already have mother. That's dumb. If you already have mother, why make mother? Even better yet, if the only way to make mother means you have to already have mother, then how do you get the mother to make the mother? I ask you, birds, how? If any of you up there have any suggestions, I'm all ears, as long as you don't bite them off. Anyway, once I have mother, I can make the vinegar. And do you birds know what vinegar will do to a... I was interrupted by a new voice, speaking over mine, and echoing into the well. Hello! I smiled happily, thinking, oh, happy, happy, joy, joy. Someone is up there. So I called back. Hello, I'm stuck in the well. Can you help me out, please? There was a pause. And then in that same foreign accent, the voice replied, oui, c'est juice. I thought I heard it wrong. So I asked, what did you say? He repeated himself more slowly and more clearly. Oui, c'est juice. But going slower did not help the translation. It kind of also didn't sound like a good thing. I understood why you would juice a fruit, but not a person. It sounded kind of painful. Maybe it was cousins with the spiders. So I wondered how cows felt on the subject. Yeah, I don't have milk, I called out in my echoing voice, because I was down in a well. There was silence. Then I heard a response that sounded confused. Good? I felt a little better, now that it had been clarified that the guy wasn't in the market for milk. So I tried again. So, sir, will you be able to help me? I heard him reassuringly pat the stones above as he replied, what was in the juice? But it wasn't reassuring to me, and I could only assume that I was hearing him correctly. No, was in the juice, I called back. So he replied a little more adamantly, what was in the juice? So I called more adamantly and in his accent, no, was in the juice. His reply was more adamant and assertive. Good, what was in the juice? I called out adamantly, assertively, and with spaces. No, sir. No, was in the juice. I could hear frustration in his voice mirroring my own. as he again called down to me in a voice he's probably only ever used on his wife before, his "darn it, woman, listen to me" voice. "Where we the Jews," he grunted loudly. He followed it up with a happy noise, and I couldn't quite translate it, but I also didn't need to, because at that moment something grabbed me around the ankles and then lifted my legs slightly. I wanted to panic, but I couldn't afford to lose what hold I had on the slippery rocks, or I might fall to my doom. I got lucky for the first time because of grabbing the ladder on the way down, but at this angle, I wouldn't be able to grab it again this time. Somebody's hands were crawling along the sides of my legs. Again, panic was crossing my mind, but then so did falling. I was breathing slowly and quietly, saying to myself, no matter what, grin and gen it. Just grin and gen it. I could feel something touching my waist, and then the back of my something touching the back of my leg. I gritted my teeth just as something grabbed my wrist, and at the same time something grabbed my ankles, and up I went, hoisted in the air like a flag on a pirate ship at sea. The sunlight was blinding, preventing me from seeing anything, including whatever was moving me. Whatever it was set me down on the ground, flat on my stomach. I blinked a few times and then sat up. When I saw some unfamiliar feet around me, I looked up, still a little unfocused, and saw a figure of a person come closer. Then it quickly stepped back and pointed at me. My focus was slowly returning. He was a short man with a kind face, and a face that looked a little alarmed. I touched my own face and then remembered, "Oh, it's just paint," I said, rubbing a little off near my sweaty brow. I showed it to him. He smiled and nodded. A slightly gruff voice spoke as a stout man came around the side of me, wiping his hands on an apron. "You hurt?" he asked, staring intently in my eyes and searching as if my eyes would tell the truth before I would. "No, sir, I'm okay," I replied. But he continued to stare for another moment as if he disbelieved me. Finally, he nodded with a gruff grunt. Then flourishing his hand and indicating my face, he added, "Kids these days, always painting themselves or putting spears through their bodies, all because they want to be different from each other. But you're all just doing the same thing." I smiled. He pointed at me, adding, "Don't think when we was younger that we didn't," he indicated himself and the other guy at this point, "jump into wells, go dragon tipping, and poke holes in our bodies with spears, 'cause we did, but we did it for our parents. So when we was painting and poking ourselves, it wasn't to be different, it was to get back at our parents." He walked over to a cart which was sitting near the well. Walking behind it, he pointed at me and added, "That's the way it should be." I nodded. He lifted a lid on the cart. His face was hidden, and then he looked around the lid at me again, pointing. "Remember that," he ordered. I nodded again. What could I say? I couldn't argue. I pressed my lips together, trying not to smile, but I couldn't help it. Like I said, I nodded, "Yes, sir." And he nodded his approval and went back under his lid. I couldn't help but chuckle. I really didn't know what a father was like, but I imagine it was probably someone like him. I looked at the man who was busy inspecting some of those broken stones in the well wall, and then spoke very slowly and very carefully because of the foreign accent issue. And I said, "I want to say thank you for not leaving and for helping me." The guy turned and smiled at me, replying in an accent, but one I could very clearly understand, "Quite welcome. Happy you get out." He nodded. I wasn't sure if he was saying he was happy or asking if I was happy, so I replied, "Yes, I am happy to be out. I was quite stuck." He gestured at the well, adding, "We get you loose." He nodded as he handed me my bag. I nodded back, accepting the bag. My bag, and then I realized something. Oh, that's what you were saying. We get you loose. He nodded, and I said I was sorry. It sounded much different from down there. I looked at my bag with its loose clasp, and then realized how I'd gotten stuck to begin with, and laughed. Oh, my hip pack strap came loose and got caught on the ladder, and I couldn't see it because my shirt was also hanging loose, obscuring my view. The other man's gruff voice interrupted my laughter. Young lady, there's nothing funny about falling down in a well. No kidding, guy. A few days ago, my daughter fell in one. Luckily, our dog Timmy was there to alert her mother, so she could save our wee little lass. I nodded in agreement, then asked, You have a little girl? He nodded proudly, answering, Yep, we've got 40 little ones. My eyes got big and wide. And seeing this, he added, with a chuckle, Oh, it's okay. They didn't hatch all at once. Still keeping some warm in the oven. He looked over at the other guy, calling out, Oh, that reminds me. That the woman wants another oven, just like you got for us the last time. Wants to spread the little ones out, give 'em more room for when she's baking the buns. Later on that day, I continued on my way and snacked on some of those buns. It was very kind of him to offer me a few. The soft wind blew, becoming warmer as I walked along, and it reminded me of what stop was next. I stood staring at my next obstacle. The winds were incredible and seemed to blow in different directions. I made sure that all my stuff was closed and secured before putting on my cloak and tucking in my boots. Pulling my hood low, I walked forward. And if I thought it looked bad outside, nothing compared to how it felt inside. Immediately the sandstorm pelted me from all directions as if the desert had sensed an intruder, and I was trying to beat her into a retreat. I wasn't sure why, but suddenly I called out, I ask permission to pass. I hesitated as I spat sand out of my mouth and added, Please. Then I put my head down, trying to hide from the pelting sand. No answer, not like I expected one, right? I tried to look around. I squinted my eyes and blinked a lot, but I still couldn't see a thing. Looking down, and still trying to hide my head from the sand, I sighed. I felt a little defeated. How was I ever going to get through this? I've read about sandstorms being strong, but not impassable. My plan was to keep my head down, my hands out, and blindly feel the sand and wind and use them like a compass, because an actual compass does not work here. Sadly, it seemed like none of my plan was going to work now. So, I got a little upset and I stomped my foot, loudly saying from within my cloak, I will not give up, because the only way to succeed is to pass. It was that important to me, yes. I reached inside my cloak to the bag tied to my left hip and retrieved a scarf, and I covered my mouth. I grabbed something else too, thinking maybe I could also use this to protect my eyes. As I tied it around that scarf around my mouth, and then I looked down and noticed something in the sand. Reaching down, I picked it up. Oh, my treasure. You know, the one I found that I worked so hard and then got stuck in a well for. Huh. I looked at it. It had an odd shape. Truth be told, I forgot about the little thing and how useful it might be here. So I pulled the goggles on and looked around, saying, Silly me to forget I even had these. Really silly of me. The goggles had kind of a pinkish purple tint to them, but they worked wonders. They allowed me to see even though I still couldn't actually see because the sandstorm still felt crazy, but somehow it didn't look as crazy. I squinted up ahead, and there appeared to be a pole and something was waving on it. I was curious. I didn't see it before, but actually, I didn't see anything before I put the goggles on. So I walked towards it and touched the flag. Then I looked up and saw another pole, and I walked to that. And then another one, and then I walked to that. And then I saw another one, but it was way, way, way far off in the distance. I took another step and started falling into the sand. Quickly I leaned back, and using my weight, I fell backwards onto the ground where it was safe. Now I was just sitting with one leg was next to me, and the other was sunk down in the sand in front of me, as if it had disappeared. I looked out in front of me, taking in the view. I focused so I could see the sand was wavy like an ocean, a great big wide ocean, one I could quickly fall into. But just beyond that was the pole with a flag. I sighed, feeling a little defeated again, and slowly pulled my leg free, and then I moved to my knees and I stood up. But then something kind of caught me off guard that I practically fell right back down again. There was a creature, maybe a man or maybe not. It suddenly appeared right in front of me. Its top was so covered in cloths I could not distinguish if it was a man or maybe a woman. It held a lantern, but its eyes seemed to glow. So I figured it was because of the lantern's light reflecting. But then his eyes also looked like they disappeared every time it held the lantern near them. It was odd. I bowed my head and stared at it, unblinking. I bowed my head at it, and it just stared back at me, unblinking. Then, using the lantern, it indicated the pole across the wave of sand. I nodded my head, saying loudly, "Yes, please, if I may, I would like to pass through." My voice was a little muffled because of my scarf, and wasn't sure if it had heard me, because it just stared at me, its eyes disappearing as it held up the lantern. The lantern creaked a little as the little creature shook it, like it was beckoning. Then the creature turned and headed into the surf, and I followed. As if it was possible for the sandstorm to be worse. Oh, it so was. Not only was the wind blowing worse, but the sand on the ground seemed to come at me in huge waves. At least I wasn't sinking in it, but the sight of it gave me a strange yearning for a wooden board. I kept close to the short creature, following its footsteps, or what I assumed would be where it would be walking, where its footsteps would be. See, I couldn't see its legs, and I figured it was because of all the sand, or just that, I would see its legs. Strangely, though, the sand did not seem to bother the creature. It seemed to float through it like a childlike abandon, even though I felt like it was kind of an old soul, and I had an odd feeling of a word echoing, Edgar. So I decided to call him Edgar. Edgar was patient. Without looking, he would slow down, allowing me to catch up when I fell behind. And I kind of got a feeling he didn't normally do that. In fact, I got a feeling he was usually quite the opposite, making other heroic adventurers run for it. I also got the sense like the spirit within wanted to run, like really run, like the cops chasing after a graveyard robber kind of run. I wiped my sandy, dampy brow, silently thanking him for not making me run. It was also strange because no matter how far we walked, the pole never seemed to get closer. Normally that would give me an uneasy feeling, like I shouldn't be following this creature. Maybe it was just the rosy glass. But as I looked at Edgar through them, but somehow I just felt I could trust him. We walked and we walked, always a step behind, as I followed his glowing lantern, until suddenly he stopped, and he gestured for me to stand next to him. I looked ahead. It was like looking through glass. Like when the storm is maddening outside, but it's all calm inside. Except this was the reverse. I was looking in on the calm while standing within the storm. We were so close to the other side that if there had been glass there, our noses would have been touching it. The glow of his lantern urged me to look up, so I did. There was a pole with a flag that oddly still looked far, far away, but at least it was a calm, far, far away. So I stepped forward into the instant calm and quickly pulled my goggles and scarf down, taking in full breaths. Then I turned back and looked around to help my helpful navigator with his lantern's glow, but he was gone. Without thinking, I just stepped back into the maelstrom of sand, shielding my eyes with my hands as I searched the sands. And oh, how that sand pelted me. Phew! I pulled my equipment back on and spat out the sand, and as I did so, there he was, right beside me. I turned and thanked him, calling out, "Thank you for all your help." His old glowing eyes stared youthfully at me, as if they were smiling. He raised his lantern and urged me on. I nodded my head and called out, "Nevermore, Edgar, will I ever forget your kindness." Then I stepped back through to the calm and started walking forward. After a few steps, I turned to look back just as I pulled the stifling scarf and dusty goggles back down. For just a moment, I thought he was still there, but through my eyes, I could see a friend and his light, or I could see that my friend and his light were gone. I sighed and smiled, and then I turned and I continued walking to the next pole. Once I got to it, or as I walked, I shook all the sand off myself and untied that mouth scarf and put it away. Then I took off those goggles and put them away. But I realized they hadn't come from the same bag as the scarf, and all my other bags were sealed closed, which was strange. I perched the goggles on top of my head. "But I'm sure glad I picked you. There was another item at the bottom of the well, but no need for greed. Let someone else have it. Plus, it would have done me no good against a sandstorm, and truth be told, I already had a magnifying glass. What would I need another one for?" As I approached the next pole, I saw my real target, the Desert Colossus. It was here that I would find Nabs, or at least I hoped I would. My mind was interrupted suddenly by illuminating light. It brought me back to my senses of where I was and what I still needed to do. I'll have to remember the rest of that quest later. For now, there was work to be done. Okay, next chapter. He watched her walk out into the arena. A black, almost snake-like tube was spiraled around her body, and in her arms she carried a cannon. While trying to manipulate some of the excess snake that was dragging on the ground. Stopping at a large rock, she released the roll from around her and laid it down in a circular form, both ends meeting at the rock. She also propped the cannon up on the rock. Oddly, it reminded Set of a black crescent moon, but with a cannon in the middle. She also had a couple crossbows strapped to her back, but they looked old and rickety. He figured she might get them to shoot a few times before they fell apart. He hoped she had more than those 2 crossbows, some rope, chain, and that roll, because her opponent did not come alone. A voice called out, "For me, the sky is the limit. For you, these walls. But my sister, she has no limits," he said, as he bowed, gesturing his fingers out to her and then to the sky. As if introducing the challenger to the champion above, Set watched Jen as she cocked her head in a curious manner and looked up at the sky. "Ah, so you've never met his sister," he muttered, settling into his seat within the shadowed balcony. He had fought the siblings before. She was one girl who was not easy. He looked up, seeing the familiar face and the identity-riddled moon. She was a beautiful apparition, living in the space between that only her brother could conjure her up, calling upon the moon, of course. Jen looked up at the woman in the moon, mesmerized by her pale beauty. She had to remind herself to keep her head and to think cheese. Oh, Cheddar. But she was so pretty. So her plan to call the celestial moon lady Munster soured. Dropping to her knees at the crescent circle, she began to dig her fingers into the ground, revealing hot, burning embers. From behind a rock she grabbed a pile of kindling and a fire starter log, her own recipe, and keeping with the crescent form, laid it over the embers and quickly jumped back. Immediately there was a full fire filling the circle in the same crescent form. Using a stick, she peeled a tag back away from the cannon and let it drop in the fire, and then she jumped back. Boom! A cheese-covered cannonball shot out of the cannon. The cannonball had 2 ropes tied around it, as well as something else dangling from it. And as it flew through the air, the ropes, that were also attached to the ends of the tube, began unrolling the tube, the material unfurling and flying flat through the air. It followed the cheesed cannonball. Jen dropped to the ground and unsheathed the crossbows. Grabbing a couple of thin ropes laying on either side of the still unfurling tube of material, she connected the ends of the thin ropes to the crossbows. At the same moment that the face in the moon turned from pity to a "Oh darn, I just figured out what you're really doing," Jen stood up and pointed the crossbows at either side of the material. Waiting. Then just as the last of the material had lifted into the air, Jen ducked under momentarily, making it just her and Brother Toast under the suspended blanket, and shot the crossbows at high points on the arena walls. Toast? The cannonball went over the outside arena wall. The dangling tail smashed into something which ran along the perimeter of the arena's topmost wall. The placement of the additional ropes, along with the cannonball, now held up the material above Brother Toast, almost like a triangle. She could hear him flinging weapons up at the material as he tried to, like Swiss cheese, put holes into her carefully laid plans. Flown plans. But try as he might to let a little light in, he could not cut through the melted Kevlar spider silk. There was a smashing sound because of the cannonball's tail, that was followed by a shattering glass sound from all around the top of the arena, followed by an ooh and ah from the audience. Within that high-up, high-pressured area, the shattered glass released high-powered electric currents along with solenously charged particles. Colors of green and blue auras waved across the night sky. Yellow and orange lightning flashed through them, creating a solar aurora borealis. The bright solar lightning caused the moon to shudder. The woman within began fading, covering her eyes as if she had been blinded by the sun. The ropes that were attached to the cannonball rubbed against the broken glass and frayed. The ropes that had been shot from the crossbows were stronger. However, the arrows were barely holding anchor to the wall, since the old rickety crossbows were used instead of nice, stronger ones. In almost the same instant, just as Toast was realizing that he had lost his sibling connection, all the ropes frayed completely and the arrows fell out, letting the great big blanket fall. "Come on, Benny, I got one, now your turn," she muttered under her breath as the material dropped. She sighed in relief as she watched the blanket land flat on the ground. She barely got a chance to look up at the HP counter when someone grabbed her by the shoulder, turned her around to face them. "Champion, where is he? Where is your opponent?" demanded some big burly guy. Others from behind him ran forward past them. She shrugged, shaking her head, answering, "Last I saw him, he was under the blanket, sir." That was supposed to say challenger. My apologies. He looked angry, nothing like the ray of sunshine that he supposedly worshipped. He left her, joining his fellows as they searched the fallen blanket. Then, finding nothing, headed out the champion's doorway to continue the search. Again, she breathed a sigh of relief, because the guy hadn't asked how asked her how she had created those solar charges. Then she would have to tell him that she stole them from their temple. Of course it was a good thing she did, though, or she wouldn't have been able to beat Bree and Toast. That's why I call him Toast. And also, she wouldn't have happened to overhear their plans to ambush the brother and sister here in the arena tonight. She looked up and saw Benny in the shadows of the champion's doorway. He gave her a nod, which meant everyone was safe. She wanted to beat the champions, not snitch on them. Besides, snitches get stitches. Like a magic trick, her opponents had disappeared. Now you see them, now you don't, she thought as she folded the material half of that, then half of that, then dragged it out of the arena. My apologies, I thought I had finished all the fights, but I have one more. It's actually, again, like I said, out of order, but we'll go with it. Hopefully I have the correct version of it. There's so many versions of these things, you people have no idea. Oh my gosh. Anyway. Alright. The poet. "Hey, Benny, do you think you could help me again?" she asked him as he tied ropes around a wooden bar, a different knot on each rope. They looked like knots that could fit around someone's neck. He looked over his shoulder at her and asked, "What do you have in mind?" "First, I need access to all 3 areas of arena's ventilation and exhaust systems. Second," she grinned sheepishly, "I need access to the champion's room." He shrugged. "Sure." Later she was hanging upside down under the arena, using a black paint on some of the piping. Benny was connecting some new piping to connect with those pipes that she was painting. One of the reconnected pipes had a picture of a fire with a line through it. "The emergency line," Benny explained when she pointed at it. She nodded and moved on to paint the grates to the outside, into the arena. A little later they were standing outside the champion's door, as Benny unlocked it. "Thank you, and I promise I won't damage anything," she said, as he opened the door. He shrugged and said, "Sure." Then he turned and walked away. She smiled at his retreating figure and turned and walked inside. Later on, the arena was warm and dim and lit only by a few torches. She walked in and stood under one of those torches. Her opponent walked in. Stopping, he stood still and calmly gazed at her. She reached down inside the folds of her robe and pulled out the first step in her attack. She took a breath and started to lift her hands when a sound stopped her. It was so quiet it could barely be heard. And then she felt it, like rain. It was raining inside the closed-top arena. She looked around to see from where, but she couldn't see an origin. In fact, she couldn't see any rain. Odd, she thought, because she could feel it on her cheeks. She looked at her hands, expecting to see water, but there wasn't any, not a drop. She looked at the poet. His face was tilted, as if he was curious about her reaction. There was a sound as if an immense number of fairies had entered the arena. The soft jingle of their wings like the dew of cooled mercury, delicately dripping on harps made of spun sugar. It felt like the sound was all around, the feeling of the invisible rain and the tinkling sounds. Some of them seemed to come together, gently tugging as if they searched deep within the space between. It was a strange and consuming experience, distracting her from her intentions. Some of the shimmering fairy lights floated around. Some of them flitted, but all the rest began to solidify in random places along the arena floor, their bodies forming massive tree trunks, only they were miniature, about the size of one's foot, standing up, heel to toe tip. She blinked as if she was coming out of a dream. The tiny golden circlet that had crowned every fairy's head now rested atop the topmost of each tiny tree's tallest branches. All the rest of the wandering fairy lights, still floating and flitting about, would occasionally land on these golden halos, but would immediately jump off, leaving only a soft chiming sound as the only evidence of their passing. With each chime the trees began to grow brighter. The fairy, leaving, dimmed. She blinked as if she was waking from a dream, but she had somehow stayed awake through. It was all mesmerizing, until she realized the dream was over, because now her opponent was beginning to glow. She gasped, thinking, "I have to stop this, or one hit and I'm gone." She balled up her fists and raised them, passing them through the torch above her. Opening her hands, her thumbs rolled tiny, colorful flames to the tips of her fingers. She threw the tiny jelly incendiaries through the air, landing them in front of the poet. His glowing eyes replicated the colorful flames over the top of their usual glow. He was beautiful, he was distracting, and he was distracting her, instead of the other way around. She began lighting more of the colored calcium acetate clumps, using her fingers to keep them separated. Carefully aiming so as to not hit any of the little trees, unsure of what outcome that combination could create, she sent them flying. A quick glance at the champion's doorway showed Benny giving her the thumbs up. It was time to switch tactics. She attached the circular tube to the rounded spot between her thumb and pointed finger. She could feel the rush of air coming from the vent behind her, and she moved the tiny pump in her right hand while blowing through the circle form in her other hand. A small, shiny object glistened on her hand. She bounced her hand and released the ball, allowing it to flow upwards. The poet began to glow more, the more he charged up. Come on, she urged herself as she continued creating more. He looked up as they floated toward him. His light wavered. A light mist was coming from some of the vents and dissipating the further it rose up. I need that moisture to move faster, she said under her breath. The poet raised his gloved hand. The crystal orb, flashing different colors, landed on his glove. It bounced, then burst. He looked curiously at where it had been. Then he noticed another one approaching him. He pulled back, fearful. No, I need you to like my little gifts, she said as she formed another glistening bubble. Bouncing it up, and she let it land on her other hand, and loudly whistled a little tune as he stepped away from yet another one. He looked over at her and watched as she played with the bubble, bouncing it around, adding another and another. She was juggling all of the orbs in one hand, spinning them around and around in her fingers. The colorful flames that she had randomly thrown around were casting small creature-like shadows on the walls, like goblins magically dancing or jumping as their master's flames flickered. One by one she took the fragile orbs and blew them into the air, into the poet's direction. Now he seemed to catch on that they wouldn't just break, and he reached his gloved hand out to catch one. The poet's eyes brightened as it didn't bust this time, and his eyes brightened as his charge light dimmed, as well as the fairy lights and tree chimes. She continued to make more, letting forced air from the vent float them right to him, and the misting vents kept the bubbles hydrated. The colorful flames along the ground and walls made the bubbles shimmer like a myriad of colors resembling jewels. Now that he had so many sparkling crystals piled into his hands, he didn't notice when ones at the bottom burst, because they were always being replaced by a new one. Precious, sparkling, glittering rainbow-filled ball. She continued creating them. The trees and fairies flickered and faded. His protectors gone, she began moving through the arena, creating more as she went. She realized his angry eyes he had earlier had become playful eyes, almost like they were very childlike, and it was beginning to rub off on her. She was smiling and softly laughing as she danced around, seemingly forgetting her own purpose until one splashed against her cheek. She quickly looked up and watched her HP counter go down some points. Then at his, which was almost empty. She felt a pang of guilt as she looked over the gentle giant playing with his toys, his very deadly toys. She had used a water-based poison to make her bubbles, and as they burst, the liquid soaked through his gloves. The oil and skin, as well as getting too dry, could cause the bubbles to burst, like it did against her cheek. But because of his gloves and the misting vents, they lasted longer, giving him something entertaining while slowly draining his life. She looked at him, so focused on his colorful bubbles. He was oblivious to everything around him, including his own dwindling HP counter. Her work was done, so she quietly gathered her stuff and made her exit. She signaled to Benny to shut off the vents so the bubbles that were still freely floating around would burst before they completely poisoned the poet. Tears were welling up in her eyes, but she wiped them away, poisoning herself a little. As she hurried to her closet and closed the door, she took a few minutes to grieve, then reminded herself it was all part of it. If she was going to live, some may have to suffer. She sighed, just as her hands began tingling. She got out the cleaner and wiped the invisible gloves off of her hands and arms. It had protected her from the poison, a recipe that she had picked up from, her old roommate. "I'm curious," she said, changing her focus, feeling she needed to check something. She got out her notes and looked them over. There's nothing about trees or celestial music. Only the tops of those little golden things are mentioned. So then what did I witness tonight? Okay, so this is the little tricky part because there are different endings too. But what makes it most difficult is because, like I said, this is kind of connected to another bigger story. This whole League of Legends fan fiction piece. It's just one dream. So it's connected to some other bigger story, and a lot of the endings that I have a lot of suggestion with that. So I'm just going to kind of give you, just because you want to always end a story somehow, right? I can't just say, that's it, that's the end. No. Got to give you something. So that's what I'll do. The first one. The arena was emptying, and the still stunned celebrators were heading for the great hall to continue their merriment. She was done, finished. The last fight had happened, and they gave her her prize, but before they could drag her into some obnoxious ceremony, she disappeared. She hid in her closet, hugged the purse, and cried. She was free, but yet in some ways she didn't feel free. She felt like she was now out of the frying pan and into the fire, a slave to something else. She had a feeling she knew what that was, ever since the handsome prince had rescued the ugly troll. While she gathered her things, she thought about their fight. Something did not make sense. How could his arm just go limp like that? She had seen it happen and used it to her advantage, but still, she had to wonder. She left her backpack and grabbed the half-full purse and headed out. Minutes later, she was taking deep breaths outside a closed door. So I thought I had a more cleaned up version of this, but I guess I don't. And if I do, it's in the phone, which I'm actually using to record. And I'm not going to mess with all that. So anyway, I'm just, like I said, just to give it an ending. It's not the right ending, but whatever. She stood outside the door and knocked. The door opened, and he stood there staring at her expectantly. A book of Mobius Richard and a pair of glasses were in his hand as he leaned against the doorframe. He stared at her. He was handsome, even more than the pictures or descriptions from her books. I don't remember what that part's about. She gulped, holding back the urge to kiss him. Instead, she just said hi. He looked reserved as he nodded his head. She couldn't speak, so he did. "Shouldn't you be celebrating?" he asked, nodding his head down the hall. Finally able to move, she stepped forward and said, "I don't celebrate." When she moved, he breathed and eyed her like she had invaded his personal space. but she didn't step back. She had to know. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Do what?" he asked back. "You know," she said, stepping forward, and then another step. He stepped back, and put his hand up to stop her. "No, I don't," he started to say, but she stopped and gasped when she reached out and grabbed his arm, and clasped her fingers around his arm, and moved them up like she was checking his muscles, and gasped more and more as she realized, and said, "You did throw the fight. But why?" she asked, looking from his arms to his eyes. They were closed. He opened them slowly and asked, "Why are you here?" She held up the bag and said, "To give you this." Without looking at it, and without looking away from her, he replied, "I don't want that." Taking a deep breath, she asked, "What do you want?" The fingers of his outstretched arm were still behind her. She hadn't moved. She still hadn't removed her fingers from around his arm. His fingertips tapped the door, and it closed behind her. She stared at him, then looked over at his book. Tossing the coins on the table, she traced the outline of his book. The small light that he had been reading by was running low on fuel, and dimmed even as she read the fading title, Richard Mobius. "I've never read that one," she said quietly, running her fingertips over the raised letters. "Then it's yours," he whispered, the light dimming out. When she looked at him, she reached up and touched his cheek. Okay, sorry, I gotta skip to the other thing, because now there's the Redream crossover thing from the other story. It would just confuse the heck out of people if I tried to put that in there. It would help make sense, but not really. Okay. So then later, we'll just say. Her nose tickled from little unknown particles in the air, like she had been dusting. She blinked awake and continued blinking as she looked around. Somehow the window was open just a crack, and it allowed just a crack of light in, right into her eyes. She didn't know what time it was, but she knew she had fallen asleep and shouldn't be awake. She blinked a couple more times as she looked over and smiled. Oops. Her silly childish dream had come true. Night after night she had fallen asleep in his bed, fallen asleep watching him not sleep. Okay, that would confuse people. Oh well. I didn't read the bet to you, so that is probably confusing. Never mind. He was not at all the tyrannical boss they all claimed him to be. Stupid shopkeepers, what do they know anyway? But she wasn't a child anymore, and she was a woman before her time, but then also not. Carefully, so that she would not disturb him, she sat up and moved to her knees. Reaching over, she laid the key down and picked up her bag, and pulled a rope out of it. Her hand hovered over the bags she had laid on the table earlier. Truly, if she didn't have debts to repay, she would let it be. It really was all his. But then there was that one moment that if he hadn't done what he did, well, then it would be all hers. She looked over at the real prize, silently whispering, "I guess we'll never know, will we?" She put the purse in her bag and tied the rope to it, the other end, and she tied a broken pole. She opened the window just a little more and threw the pole end to a strong branch. The pole wrapped around it, and she pushed the bag out, letting it fall and hang in the tree. Then she kneeled down beside him and used the moonlight to watch the rise and fall of his chest. She wanted to touch him all over, but I'll leave that for her, she said. She thought to herself. I wish I could have been her, but you only get so many wishes, and I already used mine up, foolishly. Leaning over, she brushed her lips against his forehead and whispered, "Thank you for all your kindness." Then she left a lingering sweet kiss and climbed out the window, pulling the door closed to a small crack that it had started with. On the ledge she looked around. Before, she would have been frightened of this view. She had never been up so high. and with no apparent safe way down. But for some reason, she wasn't afraid anymore. Maybe it was the strength and confidence she now had because of everything she had recently accomplished. But as she breathed in the altitude at the back of her mind, she couldn't help but think she had breathed it before and made it safely to the ground before. He woke with a start. His arm was feeling cold. He sat up and looked around, listening, but nothing. He got up and walked around the room, sniffing for her scent. He went to the door, but it was locked, with both locks from the inside. He walked back over to the bed, climbed up, and opened the window. He could smell the night air, and every other teeny tiny particle of dust thing in the whole world, but not her. He sank to the bed, smelling the sheets. He smelled her, but not in the sheets. He looked under the bed and pulled his blanket out. He had put on her while she slept, for extra warmth, one night. It must have slipped between the bed and the wall, because he had to reach all the way back for it, which for him wasn't really a stretch. He sat on the bed, noticing the bag on the table, along with the key. His key. He sighed and whispered, "No." Then he knew she was gone. He picked up the bag of money and started pacing, trying to think of where she could be, if there was anything that she had said that could give him a clue. His mother! She liked hearing stories about his mother, because she wondered if her mother was kind too. He couldn't blame her for leaving, just wished she had let him help, which he still intended on doing. One problem, he didn't know how to get there, wherever there is. Except for official business, he didn't know how to get there. Except for official business, they had closed the doors to her world, which was at the same time as their people had removed magic from their world. He stopped to look at the empty fireplace. There were scrape marks on the floor, from when he had used his foot to push the bathtub back into the bathroom. But why was it out? He suddenly couldn't remember. He went back to looking at the cold hearth, wondering, but who in his world knew or had the power? Then he looked at the scrape marks. Scrape marks where something large and heavy had been pushed or pulled from the bathroom? The scrapings reminded him of something that she had said. She had used broken pieces of stone to write on the wall. Then Set knew how to find her. Him. He had to find him. A soft breeze blew through the open window. A faint scent drew him back to the window. But he must have imagined it, because there was no scent at all. He picked up the blanket that he had left on the bed, and he smelled it again, needing her scent. The top of his back was aching again, the pain pulling him down. He sat down, smelling it again. He felt like every time he had breathed the scent in, that much more was now gone from the blanket. He also felt that ache more every time he arched his back to smell the blanket. He was feeling heavy and exhausted, and laid the blanket over his head to block out light and reality. He laid down, breathing, "I will find you." Breathing, "I will find her." No, him. No, her. On his chest. Oh, his chest was aching, but he was too tired to get up and help. The scent was fading. Then the ache started to fade. He breathed in its last as it changed back to its original scent of home. As the blanket changed back to its original scent of home. His body relaxed, and he dreamed of a wild, green-eyed champion, with honey dripping from her purple hair, raising her hands in glory, clutching her belly, curling around in pain as fire licked up and she danced over them, on top of a black moon, with dirt under her nails and water at her feet. The wind blew the phoenix blooded robes as she sprung into the sky, jumping higher than any of her kind. The stars directly above shaped as crescents, turning over and over, while she, of star and sky, was absorbed into the moon, her robes staining it red as she flipped inside of it, not once, as it flipped along becoming the sun, and then back to the white moon, but twice as the white moon bled red into the sun, becoming the black sun. The dancer's body within became an ocean current, her body waving between the two sides of neither good nor bad. The friction from the stars had created a charge that was connecting all the stars, that surrounded all the stars, to all the other stars and beyond those stars, charging the whole sky of every world, creating a power surge that could reboot all systems, all life. Then, just as the skies were shaking from the overload, the dancer fell. Everything faded, and she disappeared. From everywhere. I'm going to pause for a moment. So that's it. Are there other versions of things? Yeah. Sullivan's Miracle. Oh, that's a good one. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. A lot of different versions of things. Again, I'm not a writer. Yeah, I guess there's stuff for a book too, but did we even make it through book 1? Seriously? Ha! Yeah, again, not a writer. Meaning I did not set out to be so. As a kid, when someone said, what do you want to be when you grow up? Actress, singer, doctor, and, funny as it may sound, first female president of the United States of America. Yep, that was the answer. But not writer. That was never on that list. So, just kind of happened. Dreams are crazy. Anyway, anybody who made it this far, thanks. I apologize again for all the wording. I know, gosh, especially while reading it. Like, when you're writing something, when you're typing it, when you're writing it, you don't see all your mistakes. And then even when you read back through it slowly to pick up on mistakes, you still do not pick up on the mistakes. It's not until you actually just sit there and read without stopping. I couldn't stop because I'm recording, right? I couldn't just stop and be like, oh, let me change that. Let me retype. That's silly. Nobody wants to hear that. Like right now I'm rambling and there's nothing important I'm going to say. So if you want to stop listening now, it's totally cool. But I'm just going to ramble because I'm feeling kind of accomplished right now because I finally finished one part of this. Can you believe this whole dream? Yes, this was a dream that I had. This whole dream was because of a stupid song. Not kidding. So not kidding. Yeah, the set song, that's what this was all about. Because when I first heard it, I thought it sounded cool. But then when I thought, oh, it sounded kind of like I could maybe exercise to it. Because I'm always kind of looking for songs that I could maybe, I exercise in the dark, in the middle of the night, whatever. And so I'm always kind of looking for songs that'll be cool like that. Like the end of Moulin Rouge, the closing credits. Oh my gosh, what an amazing exercise song. Anyway, so, yeah, I thought I could exercise to the song, but I tried to exercise to it. And there was something not right about it. So then I tried to, do fight moves, exercise fight moves, if that makes any sense to anybody. Still did not work. And then I saw pictures of Set, and I thought, not to be mean or anything, but let's be honest, the guy is kind of a brute, kind of a, shoot first, ask questions later, or more like punch and kill. Well, you heard it in the story. Kill him and then have a seance if you have questions for later. Kind of guy. But that music is not brutish. It's rolling and seductive and wavy, and yeah, that's why my brain got stuck on that song, because there was something about it that just didn't make sense. You look at him and you listen to the song, and it looks cool together, like if you just look at him, but then once you actually know what kind of character he is, I'm sure nobody else in the world had this problem but me. But I looked at it knowing the more and more I knew about the character and the song and how it sounded, it didn't make sense. It's like calling a great big huge guy tiny, even though we do it, It's just kind of like, what? What? And it kind of messed with my brain. So I didn't know that's what was going on. I knew that there was something about the situation, but I didn't know what my brain was having a problem with until all of a sudden one night when I was trying to do my exercises, and that song, because I had put it on YouTube and now it was on my list, right? So it just started playing. So while I was doing my regular exercise routine, then that song came on, and all of a sudden, yeah, you guessed it, I did what I call the set dance, which is what she does earlier in the story when she does the fire dance. It all just kind of fell together. I just started doing that. Trust me, I'm like a beached whale. Dancing in my room in the middle of the night in complete total darkness. It was fun. It's interesting. Um, but yeah, that's how that all came about. That's how this whole story came about. And whereas there are some different versions of things, um, like there's uh, a few of the scenes are more confident. Like she's more confident, like she has already been in this world, she already knows about this world. But then when you realize more and more of her story, her backstory, all of a sudden my brain has to argue, no, 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 no. No, her backstory, which I didn't actually go into, if you can't tell, she was kind of a kept person against her will, so to speak, um, and had been so since she was a very little girl. So she really didn't know the ways of anything except for through her books, which is why you hear her reference it quite often. I read that in my book. That's how I learned things. That's all she could do. That's why she became Little Miss Wizard, MacGyver/MacGyver. It was because that's all she had was the books to teach her about the worlds. Um, so yeah, that said that she wouldn't have come out of that situation confident. She made a deal with the person. There's a reason why she has to beat the legends. She thinks she has to beat the legends. There's also a reason why she takes it down to one hit for every legend that she faces. She takes him down to one hit for a reason, and that is, it's one of those silly little things that you find out later on, and you're like, oh, that's kind of okay. Yeah, I get it. So I didn't worry about including it. Um, that goes into the backstory of the person who was kind of keeping her, and I didn't go into all that because that would lead into the second book if there was one. It does go into, Set finding more things out about her past, even things that she did not know. Uh, does he find her? I'm not going to say. Oh, well, yeah, of course he finds her, duh. But not quite the way you think. And, so, yeah, I mean, there's more to it and stuff, but I'm not worried about it. I'm trying to move on to that other project I was originally working on, and it sucks because I would really like to have the main story, which is how this all started, even way before this whole Set story, like years ago, kind of thing. um, that I've been trying to, write that one. Again, not a writer, just writing down the dreams. And uh, yeah. And then the set dreams happened, and because they also happened at the same time, like, I can't go in. I won't go into all of it. I'm actually not even going to finish writing the main storyline, I don't think, just because there's a lot. A lot. Like, I'm only maybe a third way through the book, and I'm already at 4,000 pages. Yep. Yeah, it's a lot. And I'm not even counting all of the stuff. So, yeah, it's a lot. And the dreams haven't stopped. And I mean, some of them I kind of ignore because they're like repeats, but some of them aren't, and even some of them are repeats, but they're repeats that change. I do a lot of redreaming, we'll call it, where my brain mid dream will say, nope, that doesn't make sense. It'll change it. Um, and so then I get to see a whole nother ending, an alternate ending to that dream. So yeah, it's interesting. I could explain why the dreams are happening because I'm pretty sure I know why, but I'm not because it's all mental stuff. No, we're not going to go into that right now. But I do believe I do like some of the dreams. I do like some of the story pieces, so I'm going to probably put pieces um on the internet. Like I said, I'm not going to actually finish writing the book itself, but I'm just going to start putting the pieces out there just because I think they're cool and I'd like to share them. Um, and that's it. That, yeah, I had fun. I'm excited. I feel accomplished, and I think I'm going to go take a nap because, like I said, I watched Bones, reruns of Bones. Probably shouldn't have, but oh well. Sometimes we gotta be selfish and do things for ourselves. Um, so, thanks for listening. I'm moving on to that next project, those pieces. Shouldn't be anything further about the set stuff. I may change my mind and add the other set pieces that I have from book one, and maybe a few pieces from that I have from later on, but doubtful. I don't know. We'll see. Um, that's it. Thanks. Peace out. Yay. Is that still a thing? I know they say YOLO isn't a thing anymore. So you're not supposed to say it anymore. Is peace out done too? Oh well, I'm kind of old school. I'm an old lady. It's okay.